Welcome to episode number 208 of CXOTalk. CXOTalk brings together the most interesting, innovative executives, business leaders in the world, talking about leadership, technology, disruption. I'm Michael Krigsman, industry analyst and host of CXOTalk. And I have a great job doing this, talking with these amazing folks. And today we are speaking with Anurag Harsh, who is the Senior Vice President and founding executive of Ziff Davis. And that hardly scratches the surface on the things that he has done. He has a music video, a performance from Carnegie Hall that is one of the most viewed, literally one of the most viewed music videos online any place, with millions and millions of views. He's written 2 books. He's one of the top LinkedIn technology bloggers. So really an extraordinary person. Anurag Harsh, how are you? And thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Michael. Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Excited to share my thoughts.
And you were even a radio announcer for the BBC earlier in your career.
Yeah, that was in a past life. I was a newsreader and a broadcast journalist. I produced a program called Science and Development for the BBC World Service when I was actually in college in University of Sheffield in England. And I was take the 4-hour bus down to London and then broadcast a 6-hour shift. And it was fascinating. And I did that for many years.
Well, you've done amazing things. So tell us about Ziff Davis and tell us about your role. What do you do?
Sure. Well, Ziff Davis is one of the world's largest digital media companies. We operate properties in the technology, gaming, entertainment, health, and men's lifestyle verticals with iconic brands such as PC Mag, IGN, Everyday Health, What to Expect, MedPage Today, Askman, and Speed Test. The Wall Street Journal describes us as, and I quote, the epitome of modern innovative digital publishing. Each month, our Ziff sites reach 1/3 of US internet audiences and 110 million worldwide consumers in over 100 countries, over 50 international editions, and over 24 languages. I joined Ziff about 7 years ago now. It's almost 7 years. And as its first and founding hire and the first executive when our CEO, Vivek Shah, took over the company. I've been involved with its complete digital transformation all the way from when it was a small privately held media company to now when it's a thriving nearly $4 billion market cap. It's an all public digital enterprise with 1,400 plus employees. We're part of J2 Global, and we're traded under the stock symbol JCOM with JCOM. I've been involved in all aspects of the company, including internal and external facing web, mobile social assets, focus on harmonizing efforts across all sales channels, social media, internet, intranet. We've done over 20 M&A transactions. I've been involved in strategy and partnerships and new business ventures, sales, marketing, revenue generation, international expansion. So really, all the way from the beginning to where the company is right now, from sort of technically employee number 1 to, where we might be 1,600 people, I don't know, but the official number is 1,400 employees. So.
And you've written a couple of books, and your most recent book is, and I'll hold this up, if you can see, your most recent book is Going Digital, which is all about digital transformation. It's a really good book, and please share with us some of the key points. Why did you write the book, and what are some of the key themes?
Well, look, we live in a crucial period in time. The rate of technological innovation has, outpaced our ability to see into the future with a reliable degree of accuracy. Yes, we're able to, cope with the vagaries of the world, yet no one can precisely say where we're going to be 5 or 10 years from now. The 21st century and its people are marked by great change, staggering accomplishment, and unprecedented uncertainty, right? So for all this, we've managed to change the course of humanity in ways our ancestors never dreamed. We've prolonged human life well beyond what was typical. We've engineered machinery and digital technology that reduce the need for human involvement, putting more time and energy, at our disposal to pursue happiness inside and outside of our workroom. We've deconstructed command and control corporate hierarchy and created this concept that we now know as work-life balance, an antidote to the pernicious absorption customary of the workplace. So, perhaps in equal measure, we've opened gaping divides of global proportions. This is a natural fluctuation of human affairs. I don't think that there's ever been, and maybe there'll never be, a perfect society. We're flawed in all too human ways. And yet in all those very flaws, when looked at dispassionately and honestly, that can reveal the doorways to a better world for us all. So when you think about it, in the last 15 or 16 years, more than half of all the Fortune 500 companies have either become insolvent, been acquired by another company, or stopped doing business altogether. And if you just look at last year, 50% of the Fortune 500 companies declared a loss. So the stride of transformation has become a revolution. Rivalries have deepened and business models have been dislocated. So the only constant is the growing severity of digital disruption. That's why I wrote this book, aggregated many years of experience on the subject of digital and digitalization and digitization and transformation at the corporate, individual, and global level. So the topic of digitalization, it's an incomplete one. To speak on the effects of digitalization will inevitably leave questions answered and perspectives unrecognized. So what I did in the book that you've been so kind to show to the audiences here is to cover these topics from as many perspectives as possible as they relate to the subjects of business, economics, and very important, psychology. My goal with the book was to present the reader with a comprehensive understanding of the myriad ways that digital technology and the mentality it's engendered has changed the course of human history, changed the way that people view each other, and has affected business practices. I've provided practical measures for people and business owners alike to create a culture of innovation that acknowledges individual differences and then seeks to harness them while contextualizing the culture in a broader discourse about the government's role in digital divides that we see opening between the peoples today. So when you look over the table of contents of this book, and it's there on Amazon, you can decide where you want to start based on your interests. You don't have to read it cover to cover. After all, customizability is the hallmark of digitalization. So when a company or a person has truly crafted a digital journey, it matters not where on the path you enter. You will always see repeated endlessly every element of the journey. And that really is the guiding spirit of what I think is the next frontier of digital thinking. And that's what the book is all about.
Anurag, you mentioned two things that I find particularly intriguing. Number one is you spoke about, quote, the growing severity of digital transformation. And then you talk about the psychological dimension of this. And I find that fascinating because as I have spoken with many leaders on this show, the issue of culture is a very, maybe the strongest common denominator when people are talking about digital transformation. And so when you talk about psychology, maybe you can, would you elaborate on that for us, please?
Well, culture is very important. Look, there's two aspects of culture when it comes to digital. It's the mindset and the method. And let me qualify that a little bit. As I was writing my book, reflecting on my years digitally transforming some of the companies I've worked for, including Ziff, a peculiar allegory occurred to me, and some of you may know it. I'm not a Buddhist, but I'm intrigued by world religions. In Buddhism, there is this belief that all of reality is as one. Everything is anything and nothing. Buddhist philosophers will sometimes illustrate this point with the allegory of what they call as Indra's net. As it goes, the universe is a net held together by radiant bejeweled knots. So just follow my thought here. It's kind of interesting, and I think there's a learning from this. The universe is a net which is held together by radiant bejeweled knots. At each knot in Indra's net, there is a multifaceted reflective gem. You pick any jewel in the net and then you stare into it, and what you will see is a reflection of all the other jewels in the net. You would see the universe over and over again. It's sort of like a mirror. So the edicts of digital transformation are not unlike Indra's net. The prevailing notion is that no matter where in the business or in the supply chain you look, you should be able to glean everything about the digital journey being the aggregate of the operational and the strategic elements in your digital process. So that includes your architecture, infrastructure, your management technology, your logistics, your planning, your governance, and everything else. So the jewels in our net are data, and the rope is all the technology we use to connect. So, at this moment, data is all about information. It's the blueprint of the physical world, the interactivities and the lines and causalities. So, that's the culture we're trying to create, which is the culture that unifies technologically, as well as from a mindset perspective, everything in the network of this invariable communication, that can automate, interpret, predict, store, self-adjust, increase the agility, increase innovation, and foster collaboration from end to end, right? So to go back to the allegory of Indra's net, when a company is fully digital and the culture is fully digital, every element is networked such that a single glimpse at one portion reveals the whole. So at an abstract level, it's relatively simple to understand, but in practice, it's a very different story. And we've tried to do that a little bit at Ziff here. And so, many digital transformation experts I've spoken to, they leave a lot to be desired. They don't provide concrete implementable solutions So for me, digital transformation is really about getting all of those pieces together from a culture perspective, to get the employees and the customers who are really the building blocks of your digital strategies. So
the culture and the psychological dimension of connecting all the pieces of the company together through data, through shared experience. On one level, it's easy to talk about, but as you said, very difficult to do in practice. And so what are some of the practical steps that an organization can take in order to execute a program or initiative of digital transformation?
Well, that's a fantastic question. And let me try to think about this a little bit. Look, companies are spending a lot of money. And why? Because of disruption, there's despondency. And that's compelling companies to launch these digital initiatives. And they're investing a lot of money, which mostly results in disappointment due to the absence of concrete components of strategy, right? As the markets are shifting downward, many companies have tried to counter this spiral by initiating these frantic investments in digital initiatives. Some of them are hiring chief digital officers, and some of them are looking at their CIOs and their CMOs to counter some of these disruptive effects. From my perspective, there are 5 things, strategically speaking, at the very high level, that companies need to think about. And let me tell you what they are. They're these buzzwords I've created. But we've sort of followed them a little bit here at Ziff, and we seem to be hitting some success with it. The first one is called the structural swivel. The second one is the inverse acquisition. The third is the offshoot, and I'll explain what these are. The fourth is the coattail rider. And the fifth is oiling the hinges. So let me start with the first one, the structural swivel. So when you think about the role of speed is crucial for digital disruption, right? And companies have these legacies. You talk to any CTO or CIO, there's like, oh, you know, I have all these legacy systems and these techniques that can impede my ability to execute. So by altering the company's configuration to spotlight, you know, digital initiatives, you know, executives can swiftly escalate the speed of transformation. So that's a tactic that necessitates earmarking funds and human resources to digital initiatives and placing digital executives in command and of existing business processes. I'll give you an example. I can't give you specific names for confidentiality reasons, but a lot of these over the course of writing my book and, you know, some of our clients, this is a bank. It's a local bank that started to, you know, actively swivel. Remember, this is the structural swivel. That's what we're talking about here. It's swiveled out of conventional high street branch-driven model by venturing outside and recruiting a CDO, a chief digital officer. In fact, the bank empowered this guy with complete corporate supervision, you know, comprising all the high street branches that were still the lion's share of the bank's income. All product, tech, sales outlets, and marketing units started reporting to the new CDO. To additionally push for digital transformation, each regional division also hired a committed CDO at the same level as the local bank president. These changes were then intended to assist the bank in, you know, obviously speeding and hastening its conversion to a soup to nuts digital enterprise and in organizing a pure digital experience across all the business conduits, which echoes ever-changing consumer and market developments. That's what I call, you know, a structural swivel. The second is a component of digital transformation is what I call the inverse acquisition. When you think about it strategically, if you're not in the right place, tactically you can't implement it. What is the inverse acquisition? Well, there are a lot of businesses that have unearthed what I call quick wins, you know, quick triumphs by placing boundaries around their digital projects so that they can function autonomously and uninhibited by traditional processes. They'll just put them in a corner somewhere and it's like, off you guys go. However, the moment the digital project demonstrates its usefulness, you know, shouldn't subsequent tasks follow suit? Persevering or preserving the project's autonomy restricts its influence on other businesses. Furthermore, an individualized gig, as I call it, is not hard for, you know, the traditional business to disregard. So one assertive possibility is to absorb the traditional businesses into the new digital unit, spreading the transformation business-wide, and then compelling the rest of the company to abandon its archaic approaches. This is what I call the inverse acquisition. This tactic is hard work. It comprises the comprehensive moving and resettlement of technology manifestos and company structures and processes and ultimately consumers from the traditional business to the new model, right? Cautious ranking and phase methodology that will guarantee that the company doesn't collapse into the disorder during the changeover. So I'll give you an example. You know, this is a British retail store. I can name this guy. It's a public company, John Lewis. It was acquired a very long time ago by buy.co.uk in 2001. And it inherited vital technology and talent that it used to quickly erect its own e-commerce business in the years shortly after. John Lewis commenced a gigantic undertaking a few years later to reconstruct its web and e-commerce framework, which involved assimilating, you know, over 30 prevailing tech systems. And then they had this e-commerce site which launched like in 2013, and it's connected with the retailer's soup to nuts supply chain and the delivery conduits, and a physical stores. Here's the thing, the 10-year-long dedicated effort increased its online sales by close to 30%. So inverse acquisition, that works. The third is what I call the offshoot. And there are 5 of them. I'm trying to be as quick as possible to explain these digital mindsets, and the companies, depending on what kind of companies they are, they can sort of decide. The offshoot is, it's unrealistic to always expect to be absorbing a traditional business into a new digital operation, especially if the digital business is not yet sufficiently developed to absorb a larger unit, or if it focuses on too much dissimilar fragment of the value chain. So, in these cases, what the businesses can do is they can discover that an optimal way to grow those ventures is to segment the separate fragments into distinct businesses that can then develop outside the principal trade or business. There's an example here as well. It's BBVA Compass, which is a Spanish bank. It's safe to talk about non-US companies in this context. They had a software development division called GlobalNet, for over a decade, and they used that to fuel their technology initiatives. A couple of years back, GlobalNet, this little software development division, transformed into Beeva, B-E-E-V-A, which is an offshoot for creating and marketing business web services. Now, although Beeva powered the base technology for BBVA, the Spanish bank's transition into digital banking, the bank's executives realized the software division's innate potential. So as an independent services business, Beeva helps other banks do what BBVA has done using Beeva's groundbreaking cloud technology platform. So in this instance, a structural swivel or inverse acquisition we just talked about may not have worked. Why? Because the bank was ultimately a financial services company, and its software division, Beeva, was a web services unit with functionality that was markedly different from the bank's core business. So that's what I call the offshoot.
Okay.
And so, finally,
I don't want to interrupt, but we actually have a question from Twitter, and it's more prosaic, but everybody's asking this question, which is, this is from Arsalan Khan, and he's wondering, where does the CIO fit into all of this? Because we think about digital transformation as involving technology, but as you're clearly demonstrating, the technology it's a piece, but it's not the biggest piece. So maybe address the technology aspect, but where does the CIO fit?
Well, the CIO fits in the middle of all of this, right? But the CIO is also responsible for a lot of the traditional legacy systems and technologies, and to be able to maintain the current sort of modus operandi and order of business within the company. A lot of these companies a lot of companies like Fortune 500 and other companies or larger companies are actually going through going through transformation whilst maintaining their KPIs and their stock price and making sure, because the street is very unforgiving. So if you actually start to slip, your stock price is really going to tank. So the CIO's job is to make sure that both sides of the equation are well balanced. So the CIO sits right in the middle of this, because obviously technology is paramount and it's sort of at the center of this. But at the same time, it's also about thinking strategically outside of sort of the confines of the CIO's office or the CMO's office or even the CEO's office. This is about, that's why, oftentimes you have chief digital officers, which are thinking very strategically about not necessarily technology or information or data, but they're thinking, well, how the hell do I just completely change the way that we reach consumers? And change the way that the company is structured so that there is a coherent, transformative strategy that the customer sees and interacts with the company in a coherent and concise manner. So So CIO is one aspect of everything, but I think that, this is a kind of process transformation on digital that requires skills from a variety of different parts of the organization: operations, information, data, executive strategy, as well as, of course, marketing.
So a key part of this then is the fact that the digital transformation is not just about marketing. We tend to think, or very often people talk about digital transformation as essentially a marketing activity, but it's not at all.
It doesn't have to be. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not at all. I mean, obviously digital sits within marketing oftentimes, but digital is way beyond marketing. It's not just about likes and social media. There's an old Beatles song, money can't buy you love. I would like to add to that, it don't even buy you a like. All right. And that's what, that's what marketing has become.
I love that. I love that, by the way. Digital money.
Yeah, money don't buy you a love, don't even buy you a like. That's, by the way, doesn't. I mean, it's not incorrect grammar. I'm just going with the actual song.
But what about Facebook? You can buy likes on Facebook.
I'll give you an example. Look, customers are not what they used to be, right? The internet has given them wings and, given us the power to express ourselves. Marketing is not what digital is. Long gone are the days of, look, we run one of the largest, we're one of the largest publishers in technology and health and men's lifestyle. Advertising and licensing are huge, huge aspects of our business, right? We stay away from gimmicks, from clever phrasing and seduction, right? The well of false enchantment has run dry. So consumers are staring down now at attempts at persuasion and, flashy advertising because they expect authenticity from corporations and individuals alike, right? The shift in consumer expectation, it comes on the back of what? It comes on the back of digital revolution, right? And unilateral skepticism towards companies and their products. So as consumer psychology changes, then digital and marketing is entering a new era where human needs, the values, and connections are defining success and failure, right? So it's a call to action to marketers and advertising executives and departments who typically have had digital functions to think about how do they change their perspective towards consumers. Companies cannot see consumers as gullible money bags or as conquests, right? They have to see consumers as community members, as tribes people, as human beings who crave trust, predictability. You see the theme here? We're talking about technology and digital, but really where I'm getting at is the ability. I call it the relationship era.
This is great. Trust. Yeah,
when I started, I must have spoken to over 100 companies in the course of writing this book, and it fundamentally came down to consumers, crave trust, predictability, transparency, respect, and so this is the pathos of the relationship era. In this era, the company's corporate value, when it comes to digital, why do you want to transform digitally, right? Your corporate value must resonate at every level, that infrastructure and it has to emanate outward through the company's employees, the customers, the suppliers, the stakeholders, neighbors, and your relationship towards Earth. So merely projecting an image is akin to falsity. The companies have to genuinely and steadfastly practice what they preach. So the ascendant paradigm in marketing and digital is completely natural. It's almost expected. When you look at the history of marketing, it becomes patently clear why this new era with digital came about, right? And there's lots of Uber trends in terms of how marketing has shifted and why digital doesn't necessarily have to just fit within marketing, but also spread into operations and supply chain and, obviously in technology itself. So there's a reason for that. The first reason is that the unsustainability of mass media and advertising, both economically and socially. Look, the cost of advertising continues to increase. Why? Technology allows marketers to reach highly targeted groups of people, and yet consumers are conspicuously opposed to advertisements. Look at the ad blocking, right? They're perceived as an encumbrance, and in some cases, frankly, they're perceived invasive. So the second thing is that the internet has dissipated the curtain of shadows that once hid corporate activity. No longer are corporations, impregnable fortresses. What remains of corporations is transparent, and it must be if companies are to win the confidence of their customer bases. These are the underlying psychology and traits that digital has to harness. Then you have the rise of social media channels, right? These are news outlets. People are sharing current events. Look at our president-elect. The guy's tweeting all the time. So people are sharing current events as they happen as opposed to retrospectively. Daily events are live conversations. And finally, the Uber trend is about the overturn of the morality of consumerism. What do I mean by that? Well, the public cares not only about the cost and quality of its products and services. Look at the millennials. People also, they care about the values and the conduct of the providers, right? Trust, reliability, ethics often supersede quality and affordability. And so you have to take all of these things into account when you devise and place your digital department. Should we sit under marketing? Should we sit, under operations? Or should we think strategically so that the company has a profoundly altered the status quo, the strategy, and the very sociology of marketing. So the question really before us and everybody out there is this: what can we do? What can we do to adapt while persevering our bottom line, right? And so you got to figure out, some kind of a middle way, and that's really where digital comes in and where it really needs to be sitting. You got to think about it as a consumer era, an era where it's relationships and it's change and values, and how do you build that story, to do things. And that's what it's all about. Let me give you an example. I'm fascinated by this. Okay. I did this last week. Type this in your Google, type "I love Apple," all right, into your search bar, and you don't have to do it right now, but if you type "I love Apple" in your search bar, you're going to get 400 million hits in about 42 seconds, right? Type, "I love Starbucks" in your search bar. You're going to get 36, 37 million hits, right? So if you're, order of magnitude less. And that's in about just under a minute. So where am I going with this? Some companies spend billions of dollars every year, right? They're getting the attention of their customers, and they don't boast nearly as many hits, likes, or love. Companies like Exxon, right? It's Rex Tillerson is in the news. Citibank, Dow Chemical.
So what's the key?
You do the same thing with these companies, and it'll tell you exactly what I told you, which is money don't buy you love. It don't even buy you likes. So type "I love Citibank" into your. It's not a pot shot at any of these companies.
How about "I love Comcast"?
It's the point I'm trying to make. You're going to get 12 million hits in 30 seconds. A lot of these companies, they don't fare any better. Where am I going with this? And they're spending over $1 billion or $2 billion in the case of Exxon.
So what's the key? So how does a company that is in business, that has operations, right, that maybe has had an adversarial relationship with consumers, gullible, you use the term gullible money bags. How can a company, a traditional company, traditional mindset, make this change?
There's three realities of today's market. People talk providence and transparency. All right. If you're in marketing and you don't understand this, then this is something that, this is the digital speak. But in terms of marketing, there are billions of people online, right? Millions of them are talking about brands, experiences, and they're posting reviews and they're reading consumer feedback. So when your customers like your brand, trust me, they will express affection for it, right? People will care about you, just how it works. Look at the app and fan club, or look at the Beehives after Beyonce's whole marketing empire, right? The second is providence. These are relationships. And what people say about you online does in fact dictate your success, right? You might not want to accept it, but that doesn't make it untrue. The third is transparency. This is both an edict and an admonishment. Be transparent and shoot to be. What happens in the boardroom is no longer a secret. And any discussions can be had, and they probably find their way into a public forum. So it's not business as usual, or I would rather call it as business unusual. So what can companies do is understand these things. The fact that people talk, the fact that there's relationships that you might not want to accept, but there's providence, the fact that this transparency matters. And so, you have to figure out digital strategies that take these into account and stitch them together in a way that can really establish that permanent relationship the company needs to build with its customers, especially the ones that are detached from it. You got to lubricate the relationship.
But how? Because the reason I ask is because what you're saying just is so much in tune with what is taking place in the market. Yeah. But companies very often they struggle with this. They want to do it. They'll spend millions and millions of dollars trying to do this, trying to buy these likes in this relationship, and it doesn't work. And how do you do it?
Many ways. Look, relationships are built on social media nowadays, right? I mean, always be connected. It's a boon. It's a curse, and consumers have perpetual access. And so, there's no relationship you can take for granted. So consumers are connected to their families, their friends, coworkers, everywhere else. And so what companies need to do is understand how social media works, especially Facebook actually, and use them in a way that can establish these relationships with these customers, understand the observations, the ideas, their concerns, hopes, their dreams, their fears, and their opportunities and their failures, and connect with them in a way that can establish a genuine relationship. A consumer complains about a product or a company somewhere on the internet. There are bots available now where you can actually go and harness that conversation and engage with that customer. Companies don't do that. And if you were to do that and just, channel that customer's complaint and address it, you might have the customer for a very long time. I wouldn't say for life, but for a very long time. And so, you don't have to spend billions of dollars in marketing in order to do that. So you have to establish trust. And it's important that you have to humanize the institution. Digital is about humanizing your institution. It's about humanizing the corporation, right? Making it predictable, reliable, honest, loyal, respect, and sharing values and empathy. That's what this is all about. It's about establishing credibility. You're asking me, well, how do you establish credibility? How do you establish congruency and care? Well, these are not very hard things to do. It's just that you need to use social media channels, and you need to use technology to figure out, and marketing to figure out how to create the credibility. The presumption of reliability and dependence must take primacy, and care, which is about caring for your customers, engaging with the customers. Their lives matter. It's about constructing a business around their needs and addressing them happily, and then congruency, which is consumers are consistently reading into the actions of corporations. You're trying to define true motivations, the beliefs, values, and purposes. That's what this is about. So how do you create this? You use technologies and social media and the tools that are available, apps and whatnot, in order to create a brand which is relationship driven and which is all encompassing. That is the only way that Fortune 500 companies and even smaller companies which are trying to disrupt them can be around.
Okay.
Because Look, Satya Nadella, who was there, the president-elect on Wednesday, he wrote a blog on LinkedIn a couple of months ago that basically said that, if you lose 30% of your customers, you're done. And 50% of the Fortune 500 companies are done, because they didn't see it coming. You had a new kid on the block that just came and swept the entire industry away. This is happening more and more. Back in the day, we had the Industrial Revolution, which was 20 years, 25 years, and you had the Textile Revolution. Now you have a digital revolution, which is 5 to 7 years. So it's evolving, it's changing, it's fast, it's in your face. People are there, they're always connected. How do you actually do it? Well, you get in front of them and you basically, you're transparent, and you got to live your life in front of your consumer, and you can't have this shadow, this veil at the back, and you got to establish this relationship. And once you have that circle of trust, it's about establishing that. Once you have that circle of trust, that is what digital is about. It's about establishing the circle of trust, and money will flow. Everything else flows, and so that's how you got to look at it.
So it begins with the strong intention to do the
Yes.
right thing. But
yes.
we have only about 5 minutes left, and there's something else that I wanted to. This conversation is very important. We could go on for another hour, but we've got just a few minutes left. And there's one other thing that I wanted to talk with you about, which is, and you'll have to explain this. You are in the star of one of the most highly viewed music videos of all time. It's gotten millions and millions and millions of views from a concert you recorded at Carnegie Hall. So very briefly, tell us about that, and what are there leadership lessons that can be learned from the musical experience?
Well, I'm going to answer this question using the form of music that I have personally known. And this is Indian classical, the music of North India, classical music of North India. It's also called Hindustani music. By the way, this is not you've been very kind, Michael. This is not the most watched video of all time. In the genre of world music, this is among the most watched. It's done about 2.5 million views over the course of the last 8 months. So
I happen to love world music, and I love Indian music. So that's my frame of reference. And millions of views for that kind of music is pretty darn extraordinary.
I mean, normally the template is a few thousand, if at all, over the course of years. So look, let me start by saying what Indian classical music is and how and then I'll give you my sense of leadership and management.
Okay, we've only got about 3 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to be very, very quick. Leadership is about the ability to change the central core from which an organization functions, right? Efficient leaders, they redeploy the makeup of shared focus. So you're altering personal space where individuals and organizations center on the ecosystem and themselves. So there are 3 things the leadership comprises: feeling, enthusing, and inventing, right? You're exposing oneself to the outer ecosystem, you're embracing the world within, and then you're nurturing and developing potential into existence. So, what's interesting when I performed at Carnegie Hall is it's about a shared system of performance that in many ways can be equated with building and playing a musical instrument. Leadership. 3 things need to happen for a musical instrument to create its best music: the frame of consonance, the motivation of the music, and lastly, you got to play with the macro voice. So when I gave my first concert at Carnegie Hall, I did 2 there, solo concerts. The first one in 2007, I felt the hall kicked me out. For I was young and I tried to perform as I always did. I was just singing. But then I came to realize that at Carnegie, you actually have to use not your micro vocals. You got to use your macro voice, which is the small voice is the instrument that's inside your vocal cords. The macro, and this is my point. The macro voice is the whole Carnegie Hall that surrounds you. The hall is entirely built according to musical principles. So you're playing the macro voice requires you to listen and to play from another place, which is to think about your audience. In other words, your customers. You got to move your listening and your playing from within to beyond yourself, right? And that is when the music, in other words, the leadership, it's not about inward. It's not about leadership. It's not command and control. It's about thinking about your audience. It's thinking about how do I move from micro to macro, and how do I form this frame of consonance and play from a macro voice. So when this occurs in an organization, and Ben Zander, actually, the Boston Symphony has done some phenomenal speeches on this and discussions. But when this occurs in an organization or society, concrete changes can be witnessed. There's a decentralization of societal space. There's a reduction in societal time down to being motionless. And there's a breaking down of the precincts of ego, right? The visible results of this practice include an amplified understanding of self, of vigor, of duty, of continuing authenticity that can be recruited and galvanized in the future. And of course, very long, deep changes, long-term changes. So that's the core of leadership. And so, when I do music, when I perform, that's how I'm thinking about it from the point of view of on stage. And how do I actually recruit the audience in order to participate with me in a way that it becomes a macro, the frame of consonance. And that's music and leadership.
We've had guests on CXOTalk who have spoken about the concept of servant leadership, and it sounds very harmonious with what you just described.
Yes. Thank you.
And with that, I'm afraid this very interesting, engaging conversation, it's time for this episode number 208 of CXOTalk, to draw to a close. We've been speaking with Anurag Harsh, who is Senior Vice President and Founding Executive at Ziff Davis. Anurag, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And I hope you'll come back and we'll have to continue this conversation another time.
Absolutely.
Everybody, thank you for watching. Next week, we have a show, and we have a show the last Friday in December as well, because CXOTalk never rests. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks for your support, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.